Alright, so this is our discussion for our second ANUBHAV test. I'll be discussing your comprehension or verbal passages. So in this paper, obviously like the previous test, we have a mix of questions and there's a certain way to solve each question. If you maintain that way, we can score better, our accuracy can be better. So I'll briefly discuss those and those ways in which we can improve our accuracy, and also discuss the answer key of the test. So let's get started with the first passage. Always remember, for small passages, we should read the question stem. This is the question stem. We should read the question stem before. In this passage, we are discussing India's banking sector. The question stem, this passage had two questions, by the way. The question stem is here asking us the root cause of the twin balance sheet problem. What is the root cause or the main cause? Main cause, right? Let's go through the passage. I've already marked it. So remember that if you mark the passage while reading in this way, I don't want you to underline everything. If you mark it briefly, your accuracy will be high. Passage is talking about NPAs resulting from excessive lending to large inefficient firms, and meanwhile corporations also face high debt levels, right? So there's excessive lending to these corporations. They face high debt levels, and this leads to a vicious cycle. They can't repay their loans. These corporations can't repay their loans. This leads to a vicious cycle, right? And this is called the twin balance sheet problem. This is crucial for reviving. Addressing this problem is crucial for reviving the trajectory of the country. Okay, so make sure that when you're reading an economics passage, again, when you're selecting the answer choice, you're not using any of your own knowledge. You're relying completely upon the passage. So the root cause here, here the right choice is A, excessive lending to large inefficient firms. So let's see what is the root cause of the balance sheet problem. So root cause, we are told, is NPAs which increase because of excessive lending, right? Excessive lending to inefficient companies, inefficient organizations. So this excessive lending leads to rise in NPAs. Rise in NPAs leads to, we can say, a balance sheet problem for banks, right? So this is a bank balance sheet problem. This is a corporate balance sheet problem, right? So both have a problem. This leads to a twin balance sheet problem. Both have a problem because of this increase in excessive lending, this being the main cause. If you look at option B, government intervention in the banking sector, we are told the issue has been compounded by a lack of political will to undertake bold structural reforms such as reducing government intervention. So we are told that government intervention is a problem, right? It's a problem, but we are told it's a part of the problem. It's not the major part. The issue is compounded by this. Matlab, whatever is the issue is increasing because of this government intervention. But the question stem is specifically asking us root cause. So this is why paying careful attention to the question stem is important. Because B is mentioned in the passage or implied in the passage, but it's not the root cause. At best, we can say it's a supportive cause or whatever. C, low levels of investment by corporations. Again, we are discussing that this impairs their ability. Corporations have high debt. So with this, their profitability and their investment capacity are impaired, right? They're reduced. So low levels of investment by corporations, again, not the root cause. And D, inadequate regulatory frameworks, also not the root cause. Root cause is only excessive lending to large inefficient firms, as it was stated here, right? Just read this: NPAs resulting from excessive lending. This is where it all begins. This is the start of it all. This is the root of it all, right? So A is the correct choice. Okay, let's look at the next one. All right. So which of the following is the most rational logical assumption? We are just going to focus on the word assumption. Let's go through the passage again. This is, in this case, I've marked separate words, and that's because always remember the options of the passage will direct you in a certain way, right? When it's an assumption question, when it's an inference question, we need to go through the entire passage, but for inference and assumption questions, we don't really need to pay attention to the main point. We can skim through it, right? Because the assumptions and inferences can be from any part of the passage. They don't necessarily have to be from the main point. Keep this idea in mind. Here we are discussing corporations also face high debt levels, and this impairs their profitability. This limits their ability to repay loans and creates a vicious cycle. We are looking for a logical, valid assumption. Remember that a valid assumption is necessary for a passage to exist, right? So valid assumption is necessary. इसका मतलब ये है that if you eliminate a necessary assumption, a part of the passage or an important part of the passage can get eliminated, meaning the assumption is necessary for the passage to exist. Let's look at this. Let's look at A. The twin balance sheet problem has no impact on India's economic growth and stability. This is obviously invalid. We know it clearly has an impact. B. India's political system is unwilling to address the twin balance sheet problem. We are told here that the issue has been compounded by lack of political will to undertake bold structural reforms such as so on and so forth. So India's political system is unwilling to address the twin balance sheet problem. This is, if you notice, we are told specifically the lack of political will to undertake bold reforms. Okay, so there may be lack of will to undertake, let's say, soft reforms. Soft reforms to undertake possible, but bold reforms not possible. So India's political system is unwilling to address is incorrect. Many students have actually gone with B. The problem is B is incorrect because India's political system is unwilling, tries to say that it's completely unwilling. But the passage is trying to say it's unwilling to undertake bold reforms, specifically bold reforms. So I can't say it's completely unwilling to address, right? This would be incorrect. So B is incorrect. Let's look at C. The balance sheet problem is caused by lending to large firms and corporations. Same problem like option B. The balance sheet problem is caused by lending to large firms and corporations. It's caused by excessive lending, not just any lending, right? Some lending is required obviously because you have to give loans to corporations. Excessive lending to large and inefficient, right? So the problem is specific, excessive lending to large inefficient corporations, not lending to large corporations. So C is also incorrect. Another option that some students had chosen, D is the correct choice. Why is D the correct choice? The profitability of corporations in India is currently affected by the twin balance sheet problem. Now obviously we are told here corporations face high debt and this leads to impaired profitability. But look at it from this rule that I told you, a valid assumption is necessary. If I say the profitability of corporations is not currently, if I put the word not here, the profitability of corporations is not currently affected by the twin balance sheet problem, this logic that corporations also face high debt levels and impaired profitability, this logic would also get negated. So a valid assumption is necessary for the passage to exist in the way in which it was presented. So remember, a valid assumption is necessary for the passage to exist. D is the correct choice for question number 2. Alright, let's look at the next one. Which of the following are the most logical and rational inferences that can be made? Another common question type, we can expect quite a few of these. This passage is about translocation of species, right? Translocation, we are told, it's defined for us. Translocation, what it is, kya hai, protecting endangered species. We are told these species may struggle to adapt. So there may be a challenge in adapting. And this may lead in unintended consequences. Something may go wrong, right? Such as disrupting natural genetic diversity, frequently disrupting, right? Careful planning and monitoring and evaluation are essential to ensure that translocations are successful. So we are told in what conditions translocations could be successful. If you take all these steps, careful monitoring, planning, etc., it could be successful. So challenges to what translocation is, challenges to it, and how we could resolve that issue or how we could make successful translocations. So let's look at these inferences. Let's look at Statement 1, for translocations to be successful, looking at genetic diversity of the ecosystem is essential. Okay, now for translocations to be successful, this is the second half of the passage, right? We know this is where the author is going to talk about what is required. For translocations to be successful, looking at genetic diversity of the ecosystem is essential. Let's look at first this idea. For translocation to be successful, what is required? Careful planning is required, monitoring is required, and evaluation is required, right? But careful monitoring, planning and evaluation of what? Of ecology, right? We are told the challenge is, so you are monitoring what? What are you monitoring here? If you want to look for one word in the passage that you are trying to monitor is, you are checking whether disruptions are occurring to genetic diversity. You are checking if disruptions are occurring to genetic diversity. That means for translocations to be successful, we need to look at genetic diversity of the ecosystem. Always remember, a valid inference is essentially taking one or two facts that are stated in the passage or multiple facts that could be stated in the passage. But remember that it's using these one or multiple facts to come up with a new fact, right? It has to be a new fact, but it should require these facts. So for example, let's look at this. Translocations to be successful, what is required? Monitoring is required. But what are we monitoring? We are monitoring the ecology, and we are monitoring whether the ecology is disrupted or not. So we are using monitoring, we are using disruption of ecology to say that for translocations to be successful, genetic diversity needs to be observed. It is essential to observe genetic diversity. So A, B and C in this case have given us X, that it is essential to observe genetic diversity. So 1 has to be right, that means this is out of question. So that means 2 also has to be right. We just need to check whether option 3 or 4 has to be right. So remember, and this question type, by the way, of providing multiple options here, this question type has recently been increased. So I expect maybe a few more to appear. Remember, the one advantage that you have to use for these questions is, once you figure out one of the options, cancel out, once you figure out one of the statements, cancel out one of the options if you can. And here you will know that we have 1, 2 and 4, 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3, 4. So obviously this is, since alright, but in this case 1 is actually valid. So we have only cancelled out B, which does not have 1. But we essentially have to check between options 3 and 4. So let's first check between options 3 and 4 specifically. So translocation should be especially be used when benefits outweigh the risks. So we are told this has to be used specifically when benefits outweigh the risks, especially. So if you notice, throughout the passage we are told the risk associated with translocation. So however translocated species may struggle, right? And if you want to ensure that this does not take place, there's a lot of steps required. You should monitor, you should evaluate, etc. So if you want to undertake translocation, if you want to put that species at risk, then you need to employ it when benefits outweigh the risks, right? It should be beneficial to that species. So 3 is valid, right? Now let's look at statement 2. The diseases carried by a species can impact new ecosystems adversely. We are told here the list of things that can go wrong, we are told here spread of diseases. So obviously 2. The diseases carried by species can impact new ecosystems adversely. So here correct choice is C, and 4 is invalid, right? Translocation should only be used as a last resort when all other conservation strategies have been exhausted. So 4 is invalid, alright. So what I want you to remember is what I was actually trying to tell you. I'm just cancelling this out. A few points to remember. One is, what is inference? We are looking at words in the passage, and using that evidence we are making inferences. In these questions, actually this example was not ideal, but in these questions when you get 1 right, use that to eliminate the options, because this is going to speed up your process. In this case, however, 1, 2, 3 were correct, so here C is the correct choice. But remember to use these options to eliminate the option, so you'll be quicker at it. Let's look at the next question. Here C is the correct choice. Okay, which of the following is the most rational assumption? Again, Passage is fairly easy, we know about the passage. Let's talk about sale of urea, the primary cause of worsening plant nutrient imbalance and deteriorating soil health. So we are told what is the primary cause of this, and this has crossed an all-time high. The sale of urea has crossed an all-time high. We are told the negative impact, clear evidence of declining nitrogen use and crop yield. This is the negative impact. And we are told the main reason. The reason for this is the MRP of urea has been unchanged. Then evidence is given कि बाकी के fertilizers का कितना cost है, compare that to urea, so on and so forth. Then we are told that while these factors such as diesel, petrol, LPG aren't underpriced, urea is underpriced, right? MRP of urea has been unchanged. And this has continued to be a political hot potato for successive governments. So political hot potato, even if we don't know what this exactly means, and this is where I wanted to keep in mind, if you don't know the phrase, exact meaning of a phrase, there's no point panicking. You have to make sure that you simplify your way to it. Here we are told MRP has been unchanged, right? So we know the politicians or the leaders could not change the MRP. So we can say has continued to be a difficult thing. Even if we didn't understand what hot potato means, it has continued to be a difficult thing for successive governments to change the price. Itna we can understand. Okay. Now let's look at A. Farmers are not interested in improving soil health. Like we said, assumption has to be necessary. Here farmers are not interested in improving soil health has not really been discussed. We are discussing why farmers are sort of forced or out of choice. They have no other choice but to use urea. So whether they are interested or not in improving soil health, not discussed. In option D, increasing the price of urea will automatically reduce its overuse. Just increasing the price will automatically reduce its overuse. That is not necessary. If you notice here, farmers are over applying urea has been told to us. But if you notice, just a moment, right, so far from discouraging the nitrogen use at expense of other primary secondary nutrients, so far from, instead of using other nutrients, farmers are over applying urea. So that is implied here, right? So we know that there is some associated behavior change also. It's not an immediate change. Farmers know it's loss making, a behavior change also is required. But the most important thing that I want us to notice about option D, will automatically reduce its overuse, means it will 100% reduce its overuse. The problem with this statement is, we are told here that MRP of urea has been unchanged, right? So suppose I change the price of urea and I change it from 5,600 to 5,700. That's not going to help. Increasing the price of urea more than the other prices will reduce or may reduce its overuse. You have to make sure that the price is such that it's competing with the other prices. It can't just be a minor increase. So increasing price will not automatically reduce its overuse. ये गलत हो जाएगा, right? Just a small increase will not automatically affect. C, alternative fertilizers are ineffective. Effectiveness of alternative fertilizers not discussed in the passage. So C is invalid. Let's look at B. The government's policies on urea pricing are influenced by political considerations. We are told the government's policies are affected by the political difficulties that the subject of urea pricing leads to. So B is the correct choice for this question. Alright, let's look at the next one. B is the correct choice for this. Okay, so which of the following are the most logical and rational inferences that can be made? So inferences, we are looking at facts. We need necessary facts in the passage. Let's look at 1. The use of urea is the primary cause of declining nitrogen use, efficiency and crop yield response. If you notice, 2 reasons were given to us, 2 negative outcomes were given to us. Urea, excessive use, all-time high use, and this has led to clear evidence of declining nitrogen use efficiency. So this means declining use efficiency for plants. It's not stated, but it's implied in the passage. Who is the user here of nitrogen? Plants, right? So declining nitrogen use for plants and crop yield response to fertilizers. So these plants are also not responding to fertilizers. Their yield is also not improving. So in short, here the use of urea is the primary cause of declining nitrogen use and crop yield response is valid. We are told use of urea is the primary cause in the first line itself, and these two negative aspects, nitrogen use efficiency and crop yield response, are later provided to us. This is a valid inference. Let's look at two. Alternative fertilizers are required in much lesser quantity. Alternative fertilizers, even in the previous question, were mentioned, but they are not discussed actually. Much lesser quantity, much more quantity, we can't know. So 2 is invalid, 1 is valid. 2 is invalid and 1 is valid. So we just need to check between 3 and 4 whether 3 and we just need to check option 4. 4, diesel costs are no longer a political hot potato for today's governments. So 3 को तो check करने की जरूरत नहीं है. 4 में diesel costs are no longer a political hot potato. So let's just say diesel costs are no longer a political problem for today's government. So I can't say whether today's governments, whatever today's governments may be, right? I can't say whether today's governments are facing problems with regards to diesel cost or not from the passage, right? And more important is today's governments also implies future governments, right? If suppose tomorrow there is a government formed, it would include that. If today's governments don't consider diesel cost to be a hot problem or to be a major problem. So we know that 4 is invalid and D is the correct choice. We can also justify 3. The price of urea has not been increased for a long time. This is clearly stated. It is in fact a fact but not an inference, but still I mean D is the correct choice for this question. Alright. So the first answer to this question from the passage was B. Most rational assumption answer is B. For most logical inference, answer is D. D for Delhi. Let's look at 6. Based on the passage, what could be the long-term consequences of continued overuse of urea? So we are talking about what could be the long-term consequences of continued overuse of urea. So this is still, by the way, an implication, inference, or conclusion kind of question. These words essentially mean the same thing, which is why I'm trying to tell you that think of these questions in a similar way. So we are looking at what could be the long-term consequences, and if you notice, decreased crop yields is valid, but improved soil health is not valid. We can't say long-term consequence of overuse of urea is improved soil health. Similarly, I can't say overuse of urea will lead to soil health changes. Changes how? Positive changes or negative changes, followed by worsened crop nutrient balance. So this is correct. But I can't say A first, then B. Right? Soil health changes first and then crop nutrient imbalance occurs. So A first, then B. This is incorrect logic. This is suggested by followed by. So this is also incorrect. And soil health changes, this phrase itself is also incorrect because soil health changes to positive or negative, we don't know. Topic specifically says soil health changes to something negative. So C is incorrect. D, improved nitrogen use efficiency is obviously incorrect and balanced plant nutrient is incorrect. B is the correct choice here. Decreased crop yields and worsened soil health. This was actually an easy passage compared to the rest of these passages. B is the correct choice in this. Okay. Now let's look at the next one. Here, based on the passage, which one of the following can be inferred? Now the passage is talking about common and differentiated responsibility. India has maintained its right to rely on coal plants in the interim period. So I've marked this. India has the right to use its coal plants in the interim period because it is still a developing country. You are told the reason also clearly. So the true cost of renewable sources, solar, wind, nuclear, remains much more. So renewable sources ka cost is higher. The industrialized West is slowing fuel consumption, continues to rely on natural gas and keeps falling short on commitments to transfer technology. Thus, coal is a necessary evil, but still evil, and seeing it other way belies scientific evidence. So in short, if you look at the passage is talking about how India has currently the right to run its coal plants because it's still not a developed country yet, and we are told the problems of how the West treats this subject, and this is well known to us. Even though this is well known to us, make sure that you rely on the passage to answer the questions. Okay. So let's see which of these are valid inference. Let's go to A. Renewable energy sources are inexpensive. We are told they are more expensive. True cost of renewable sources remains much more, right? So inexpensive is incorrect. The cost of renewable sources will never be lower than fossil fuels. This is also completely beyond scope. I can't say will never be lower. C says the true cost of renewable energy sources is ignored by most countries. Ignored by most countries. Most countries also, the subject of most countries is beyond scope. Because passage is, it's not an inference, could be made about most countries, but whether they ignored it or not is beyond scope. And that is because passage is specifically spoken about India and industrialized West. So I can't say most countries of the world, right? So C is incorrect. D, renewable energy sources can be a more cost effective option in the long run. So this is a perfect example of an inference. Like I said, an inference is taking things stated in the passage, let's say multiple things, and coming up with something new, right? Completely new. But completely new in the sense that it relies on these. Without, in the absence of this evidence, you can't come up with that thing. So the renewable energy sources can be a more cost effective option. How? Because India is just for a while relying on it in the interim. India is for a while or for the interim relying on coal plants. And that is because the cost of renewable sources is much more. So इसका मतलब क्या होगा? In the future, let's say still a developing country. In the future, let's say 2030, India is developed. ठीक है? तो इसका मतलब, according to this, इसका मतलब we'll stop using coal plants, right? So 2030, India becomes developed. Let's say no coal. No coal is used anymore, right? So that means if no coal is used anymore, we are using what? Affordable renewable energy. Affordable because वो अभी महंगा है. We are told it's right now much more. But eventually when we become a developed country, it won't be much more for us. So renewable energy sources can be more cost effective option in the long run. They can become lesser for us as we become developed and as we have the tools to address it. So D is the correct choice. If you notice, we have words in the passage, but nothing directly states that renewable energy source can be a more cost effective option. It is implied or it is an inference based on certain facts stated in the passage. All right. Remember this question. D is the correct choice. Let's look at the next one. The previous question, actually, just to mention shortly, the previous question was a little tough for students, and that's because this sounds like a new option. We just have to look on the, or rather the mirror image of what is stated in the passage. India currently can't shift to non-coal sources because they are too expensive. In the future, we can. That means in the future, renewable sources can become more cost effective. All right. So we are looking for crucial message. Anything that we read in the exam, any passage, always has a main point. Now, main point, we don't specifically have to trace this main point for all questions. We have to only trace it for these crux of the author, main point of the author wale questions ke liye. For summary questions, best sums up, summary questions. We don't usually trace the main point for assumption questions, inference questions, because assumption inference kahi se bhi aa sakta hai. So we just skim through the passage. Keep this distinction in mind. Okay, so let's look at, we'll try and identify the main point of the passage. Like I said, main point is usually given and we can usually reduce it to a few words. We should mark them specifically and our accuracy will improve. It is widely believed that our understanding of history comes from textbooks. ठीक है? This is not entirely the case. The topic हुआ author का, the topic is where does our understanding of history come from? ये topic हुआ, where? But main point is not the topic. Main point is the topic and what the author wants to say about the topic specifically. So where did our understanding of history come from? Not entirely from textbooks. This is the author's main point. It didn't come entirely from textbooks. It came from lived experience. Right? Lived experience के examples आगे दिए. What we read in fiction, non-fiction, what we watch, what we are told by our friends, family, social media, what we see of history in our daily experience in the form of monument ruins, material objects, etc. So the story is told to us. We are told how all of this informs our understanding of history. So main point of the author we can say is just the words marked in the passage. Okay. Now let's go through the options. A, our understanding of history comes mainly from lived experiences such as interacting with jewelry. So interacting with jewelry is actually mentioned, right? But comes mainly from lived experiences is invalid. It actually not entirely the case means some from textbook and some from lived experience, right? This is what means by not entirely the case. So I can't say mainly from lived experience. Mainly actually makes A invalid. Also remember, like I mentioned in the previous test, if we mark options, our accuracy would be higher. If we mark exact words which makes an option correct or incorrect, our accuracy will be higher. Let's look at B. Working knowledge of history comes only from our personal experiences. Same thing here, some comes from textbooks and some comes from lived experience. So I can't say only from personal experience. B is invalid. D, our knowledge of history comes from what we learn from our families. Again, reductive. Some from textbooks, some from lived experience. D is incorrect. C is the only possible choice. Our historical worldview, so our view of the world is informed by various sources including personal experiences, media and food. These are just some of these listed. Actually option C could have listed all, which is not necessary to say the main point, or option C could have just listed some other things also. For example, our historical worldview is informed by various sources including the stories told by our families. What makes option C correct is informed by various sources. This idea that it comes from multiple sources is not present in A, B or D. That makes C the perfect choice. Alright, so for this question C is the right answer. Let's look at the next one. Okay, with reference to the above passage, which of the following could be the most rational and practical implications? And remember this type of question, they have recently started asking this type of question, most rational practical implications. You have to essentially solve it like possible inferences, but always pay attention कि उसके बाद implications of what बोला गया है. ठीक है, here most rational and practical implications of the guidelines being implemented. तो passage में कोई guidelines है, let's say guidelines implemented. What would happen after? What would happen? Guidelines implemented. What would happen after we implement them? What would take place? Right? This is what is being asked by the question. You need to have this clearly in your head. Otherwise, the options will seem confusing. Okay. The passage was a little difficult to read, but it's stuff that comes in the newspaper. It's a regular article that we can observe in the newspaper. So let's look at the passage. The central bank's draft guidelines on fair lending practice are aimed at obviating a practice where lenders have hitherto levied a personal or a penal interest over and above the contracted rate of interest. So let me just explain this properly. These guidelines were created by RBI for obviating matlab eliminating a practice. To eliminate a practice where lenders have matlab, let's say this is bank is lender, right? Lenders have levied a penal interest over and above the contracted rate of interest when borrowers delay payment. So lenders are troubling borrowers simply. We can intuitively understand this. Okay, so lenders are troubling borrowers. We are told often the regulatory intent of a penal levy was solely to foster credit discipline among borrowers. तो ये जो initial intent of penal levy ये जो था मतलब penal levy मतलब कुछ तो fine लगा रहे, borrower पे fine लगा रहे हम लोग. So this fine is if borrower X does not pay the loan, he has to pay a fine, right? And this is what the bank is charging him. The bank is charging him extra fines. This is what the passage was talking about, right? The bank is charging extra fines to borrowers. So we are told this fine was kept by RBI to ensure credit discipline so that the economy remains disciplined. People feel fear and they pay back the loans. But instead what happened is in practice, banks basically used this to increase their revenue. Bank wanted to make more revenue. So we are told in the next sentence, this led to some disputes also. But now what the bank has done, the banking regulator has now emphatically laid down that penal charges should be recovered separately and must not be added either to principal or outstanding. So now, in short, banks are not allowed to make extra fines secretly. Banks will have to make that extra fine separately and clearly. That's the one thing that the RBI guidelines have done. So like I said, the question is the guidelines which are ensuring that these fines are charged in a correct way, in a way in which it's not kept from the customer, right? If these guidelines are implemented, what would happen after? Let's go through the options. One, lenders will no longer be able to, so lenders matlab banks will no longer be able to charge penal interest over and above the contracted rate of interest when borrowers delay repayment or default. So this is directly stated in the passage. We are told that lenders they are not allowed to charge penal interest according to the guidelines. And we are talking about what are the practical implications of these guidelines. वो implement हुए तो क्या होगा? Lenders will no longer be able to charge because they are not allowed, they can't charge. Lenders will have to recover penal charges separately, this is also directly stated, and cannot add them to principal outstanding. So they can't hide the charge anywhere. This is directly stated in the passage. Actually, all options are stated. 3, borrowers who were previously charged excessive rates of penal interest. We'll put 3 aside. We'll come to 4. Credit discipline can improve among borrowers and prevent lenders from using interest. So A can happen, which is credit discipline can improve, and B can happen, which is prevent lenders from using penal interest. Both A and B can be the outcomes of guidelines being implemented. 4 also is a little problematic for students, but we are looking for guidelines being implemented. A will happen, which is credit discipline will improve, and B will happen, which is private lenders will stop troubling essentially the borrowers. So 4 will definitely happen. Now let's come to, I'm actually clearing everything. Let's come to statement 3, which was a little problematic for students. So, and that's because here the options don't make it easy. A lot of students have actually gone with 2 and 4, and a lot of students have also gone with A. So C and A have been choices, but they are incorrect choices, as you can see, and I'll explain why. So I think I've explained 4 enough, but let's look at 3 ones. Borrowers who were previously charged excessive rates. So let's say P is a borrower, right? And let's say we don't know the date of the passage, so all of these are assumptions. P is a borrower. P in 2020 to 2023 has a dispute going on with the bank, right? बैंक के साथ ये dispute चल रहा है कि they are charging excessive rates to P. ठीक है, P is paying excessive rates, तो उसका 2020 से 2023 पे ये excessive rates का debate चल रहा है. Now, if the bank has issued guidelines and the guidelines get implemented, so what will P do? Let's put P here. P, who was previously charged excessive rates of penal interest, मतलब P को पहले परेशान कर रहे थे, उसका excessive rate लगा रहे थे. P, who was excessively charged penal interest earlier, may now, this is great because it's not saying definitely होगा, may now be able to dispute and potentially reduce overall repayment amounts. So people who have currently, in short option, ये statement 3 क्या बोल रहा है, जो अभी लोन ले चुके हैं और जिनका भी dispute चल रहा है बैंक्स के साथ, their lives will improve after the guidelines are implemented, right? This is what the passage is trying to say, or this is what statement 3 is trying to say. So the correct choice here is D. I hope I've explained 4 and 3 enough. If it's not, please go back and watch the video. But credit discipline can improve, and this also can happen. A and B can happen if guidelines are implemented. Similarly, borrowers' lives will improve if guidelines are implemented. Alright, D is the correct choice for this question. D is the correct choice. Let's look at the next one. Alright. we are looking at which one of the following statements best sums up the above passage. I've discussed what summary questions are. Look at a summary question like the author is your friend and you want to give their full message, right? The full message has to be given and the full message has to be given from the point of view of the author being your friend, correct? We are looking at a way to replace the passage. I also want you to think of the summary question as we are looking at just one of these options trying to completely summarize what the author is trying to say. So look at the option as if you're evaluating between, let's say, option E versus option F. The decision that will help you is which is a better way to replace the passage. Better in the sense of accuracy and which is more holistic, both points of views. Okay. For a summary question for all options in the exam, please remember we can only eliminate our way to the answer. Don't select your way. The passage is talking about 4 key mechanisms that translate a demographic bonus to economic dividend. Those 4 are told to us: employment, education and skills, health conditions and governance. Now throughout the passage, वो author ये कह रहा है कि how with employment we can make sure that demographic dividend will become a bonus. Similarly, we are just discussing jobs here. Education and skills generate important things, so it's good. Skilled and healthy workforce is also beneficial, and we are told finally in the last sentence how good governance is also important. So essentially, these 4 key mechanisms that translate a demographic bonus to economic dividend, this is the main point of the author. A summary is not just the main point, right? Ideal summary. An ideal summary is not just the main point. An ideal summary includes the main point and all these things, at least the important facts or opinions made by the author, right? At the least, it should include both main point, facts and opinions, all right, and accurately like we discussed. Now let's go through the options. Let's start with option D actually. The education, skills and health conditions of population. Actually, if you notice, education, skills and health conditions are discussed. It's leaving one thing out, which is employment. But it's saying are not important for realization of demographic dividend. This is extreme and obviously incorrect. Now let's look at C. Only job creation can ensure India will realize. So no one has gone with option C. Option C is extreme and incorrect. B. The key mechanisms to translate demographic bonus into economic dividend are healthcare, job creation and governance, and these can help India become a developed country. Actually, few people have gone with B. But those who have gone with B, I wanted to read B as just the words marked in red. The key mechanisms can help India become a developed country. Just these words. And if you read just these words and exclude the words in between, you'll immediately know that option C is invalid, because nowhere have we discussed what will allow us to become a developed country, right? What specifically will allow us to become a developed country. So B is invalid, and A, the realization of demographic dividend in India requires job creation, education, skill generation and good governance. ये चारों mention कर रहा है, the 4 key. So if you notice, the main point is completely mentioned here till governance, from start till governance. And the other part, why are we discussing 4 key mechanisms? Because to translate demographic dividend opportunity into economic gains. So the main point of the author is completely mentioned here, and option A is the clear choice. So if you notice, option A also has these facts are missing, but it's better than options B, C and D. Clearly better than options B, C and D. So evaluative approach is the right choice. Always remember to keep an evaluative approach. Don't select your answers. All right. Okay, let's look at the next one. Which of the following is the most logical corollary? So most logical corollary, think of this as most. So logical corollary is if X is proved, then based on X, therefore Y is proved. Right? Logical corollary essentially means using something else to justify or establish something that is implied or something that is directed from the initial proposition, from the initial suggestion. Okay, so first let's figure out ये initial idea क्या था और उससे which other idea we can come up with. And here this was a little difficult passage for students to read. Empiricism को define पहले किया गया है. Empiricism is a philosophical approach. उसमें क्या कहते हैं? Emphasizes the importance of evidence and observation. So empiricism is looking at evidence and observation. Similarly, rule of law is a legal concept that promotes law and equality. So similarly, rule of law is about law and equality. Empiricism is about evidence and observation. Rule of law is about law and equality. Then the author directly tells us the similarity. Both of these concepts are based on the importance of evidence and impartiality. So in short, now we are discussing the similarity of both of these concepts. So let's just focus on the word both. This is so far the main point of the author. Both have a similarity. The rule of law requires that legal decisions are based on evidence rather than personal arbitrary preferences. This aligns with the empiricist view that knowledge should be based on observation and evidence rather than on speculation or intuition. The second half of the passage essentially tells us that both empiricism, whatever this is, and rule of law, we know what this is, are essentially focused on importance of evidence and impartiality. So let's look at the most logical corollary. Let's look at A. Rule of law. Just read the words that I've marked. Rule of law is essentially about experimentation. Like rule of law stresses on experimentation. So nowhere have we talked about experimentation in the rule of law. Rule of law is supposed to be here importance of evidence and impartiality. So there is no randomness. It is against arbitrariness. Right? So A is invalid. Similarly, let's look at D. Empiricism emphasizes legal decisions. Empiricism in the passage is similar to rule of law, but empiricism is not linked to legal decisions. Correct? Empiricism is similar to rule of law, but not linked to legal decisions. So D is incorrect. Let's look at B. Empiricist emphasis on speculation or intuition. This is factually incorrect. Right? Emphasis, the empiricists pay or attention, empiricists pay attention to observation and evidence, not speculation or intuition. They don't pay attention to this, they pay attention to this. Excuse me. So B is also incorrect. Empiricist emphasis on speculation or intuition is incorrect. Let's look at C. The overlap between empiricism and the rule of law lies in their shared emphasis. So both emphasize importance of evidence and impartiality. So both have an importance for evidence, impartiality and objectivity in decision making. So objectivity in decision making is, you're again talking about impartiality, you're being objective. So it's the same thing that is stated in option C. Option C is the best possible choice. Option C is the most logical corollary. Right? Let's look at, those of you who found this question a little difficult, passages talking about the similarity between both of these concepts. This is a sentence that you should, at least the word that you should mark. And remember, options A and D are talking about one concept. Here rule of law is discussed, but in a negative way, and here empiricism is discussed, just one concept in a negative way. So C is the correct choice. We need to discuss both the concepts to come up with the most logical corollary. So logical corollary should follow the logic of the passage in a similar way. C is the correct choice for this question. Let's look at the next one. Based on the passage, which of the following is the most valid implication? Alright. Now passage is fairly easy. We'll go through the passage. Rapid population growth coupled with economic development and urbanization has led to surge in demand for natural resources. So demand for natural resources has increased because of A, rapid population growth, coupled with B, economic development and urbanization. So A plus B plus C, all of this has led to demand for natural resources increasing. This puts immense pressure on Indian ecosystems, natural resources. This leads to loss of biodiversity, environmental degradation. The overconsumption of finite resources is also contributing to climate change, exacerbating social economic inequalities. Addressing this challenge will require a shift towards sustainable consumption patterns that prioritize efficiency, conservation and the use of renewable resources. So in short, the main point of the author is, author told us a problem. Problem is, this demand for natural resources is shooting up. Right? Uske causes diye. But if you want to address this challenge, you will have to make sure that people shift towards sustainable consumption patterns, right? Because the problem is coming from overconsumption. So just the words that have boxed, demand for natural resources increasing because of overconsumption. To solve this problem, a shift towards sustainable consumption patterns is required. This is the main point. Let's look at the options. One, rapid population growth will exacerbate and perpetuate existing social ills. So rapid population growth is discussed obviously here, but will exacerbate, matlab will worsen. The problem with the word will is matlab 100% hoga ye. This will definitely happen. But I can't say this from the passage that it will definitely take place. Right? So rapid population growth will 100% exacerbate and perpetuate existing social ills is incorrect. And it's especially incorrect because we are told A coupled with B and C. Right? So I can't say A alone will worsen. ये logically incorrect हुआ ना, because I'm just saying A alone will do this. The passage is talking about A, B, C doing this. So A is invalid here. Option A is incorrect. Let's look at option D. Environmental degradation and biodiversity are irreversible causes of overconsumption. So they are causes of overconsumption, we can say, but they are one of the causes maybe, or possible causes, or one of the causes. Right? So we don't have a particular problem with possible causes or one of the causes. What we do have a problem is irreversible causes. Whether this loss of biodiversity and environmental degradation cannot be reversed, we cannot stop it, is not discussed in the passage. Actually, if the author is trying to say addressing this challenge, we can at least infer or we can infer or imply that the author hopes it is reversible. Hope to hoga author ka that it's reversible, because the author is telling us how to address the challenge. So is irreversible is incorrect. Some people had gone with D as well. B is the correct choice for this question. B is saying shifting towards use of renewable resources, right? We are told here, how do we address this challenge? To address this challenge, shift towards a new consumption pattern, right? And new consumption patterns of which kind? That prioritize efficiency, conservation and the use of renewable resources. So actually, let's read the last sentence as okay, I'm just cancelling all of this. So read the last sentence as addressing this challenge will require a shift towards sustainable consumption patterns by use of renewable resources. Okay. So in short, if we use renewable resources, you can help address this challenge. Challenge kya tha? Socio-economic inequalities, exacerbating climate change. Ye sare challenges, if you do one of these things, which is renewable resources pe focus karenge, these challenges can be improved. So shifting towards use of renewable resources, which is discussed here, can help mitigate social and economic inequalities. This is a valid answer choice, absolutely, right? And this is based on the second half of the passage. Please reread these sentences, address this challenge. This challenge refers to the challenges mentioned here that are caused by these three factors. And to address this challenge, one of the things we can do is use of renewable resources. Since it's one of the things, I can say can help. This is valid. If this said will help or definitely helps, any of these things, it would be incorrect. But can help is valid. So option B is the correct choice for this question. Option B. All right. Let's look at the next one. Which of the following would be most supported by the author of the passage above? So let's go through this passage. Like I've stated during classes, many times speeches are given, many times writings are given. So this is taken from Gandhiji's writings about villages or self-governance. So my point was that if you take a passage and if you see and you know its source, don't let it inform how you solve. Your solving should be based on the passage, not on any opinions that you carry. UPSC will often use passages which we know or which are famous. Let's go through this. Independence must mean that the people of India, not those who are ruling today over them, independence must begin at the bottom. Thus, every village must become a republic or a panchayat, right? We are told it follows therefore that every village has to be self-sustained and capable of managing its affairs even to the extent of defending itself against the whole world. So we are told by the author about how independence actually would mean according to the author. Every village must become a republic. So most likely supported by the author of the passage. Don't think of what Gandhiji will support or not. Think of the passage only. Alright. Make sure that you don't use any of your own knowledge. Okay, so let's go to D. Villages in India should rely on external support. Here we are told self-sustained. So rely on external support, invalid. Independence should begin at the top, invalid. Independence should begin at the bottom is told to us. So C is invalid. The author wouldn't agree with this. B, ruling over the people of India is necessary for independence. We are told here, so independence means independence of the people, not of those who are ruling over them. So is necessary for independence, invalid. Ruling over is necessary. A is the only possible choice. Now in A, many people have not selected A because of the use of the word every, but let's say every village in India should have full powers and become self-sustained. So we are told every village must become a republic and even to the extent of defending itself. So every village in India should have full powers, must become a republic and become self-sustained. Self-sustained must defend itself. So A is the clear choice, right? A is the clear winner here. All right. Let's look at the next passage. Here the answer is A for this question. Let's look at most logical and rational inference. This passage is talking about materials such as steel and cement are important components in construction, but they're also heavy CO2 emitters, making decarbonizing these industries a priority. So the author is talking about this, is talking about a problem related to this. Steel and cement are CO2 emitters, and this makes decarbonizing them a priority. The author is talking about decarbonizing steel and cement. We are told steel production accounts for around a quarter of GHGs. A big part of this share comes from mining and transportation used in production. So we know these facts. Again, don't let them inform your answer choice. Stay with the passage. Come up with the answer from the passage is what I mean. Let's look at A. The construction industry is not important for reducing carbon emissions. So construction industry is not important. Invalid. We are told in fact steel and cement and essentially construction here, production and in construction is directly mentioned. So the construction industry is not important is incorrect, is actually the regulation of the construction industry, or rather how the construction industry uses steel and cement is important. So I can't say is not important. A incorrect ho jayega. B, the impact of greenhouse gas emissions on mining and transportation is undeniable. Actually, a lot of students have gone with B, and always remember B mein galti kya hai. B mein cause effect is changed. So we don't quickly pick up on it. Make sure you read options carefully. Passage में था cause is mining and transportation. This is the cause. और ये cause का effect था impact of greenhouse emissions. Option B उसको उल्टा कर रहा है. Option B is saying the impact of greenhouse gas emissions on mining is undeniable. So cause and effect has been interchanged. It is stating the opposite of that is what is stated in the passage. So A and B are incorrect. Let's look at C. The steel and cement used in construction must be replaced by sustainable materials. Must be replaced. ये replaceable है या नहीं? Not discussed in the passage. Do I know if it can be fully replaced? Unknown. C is invalid. D is the only correct choice. The steel and cement industries are significant contributors. They are heavy emitters to greenhouse gas emissions. So this is obviously the best possible choice. So for this question, D is the correct choice. Some students have gone with A, but overwhelmingly D has been the correct choice. Let's look at the next one. Okay. So which of the following is the most rational logical assumption? The passage is fairly easy. We are talking about some AI bracelets that can be put around the ankles of animals, and this will allow them to spot the animal when it's in some trouble and this will help conservation. So how bracelets can be used for conservations for animals. We are looking for an assumption, so the assumption has to be necessary. Remember, we can just put the word not in a valid assumption and check if it's valid or not. But once we have to narrow down to that assumption first. So first let's narrow down to it. A, the use of bracelets will obviate, will eliminate the need for traditional conservation methods. Now a lot of students will panic or will worry about what if they don't know this word, right? The use of bracelets will something the need for traditional conservation methods. So even if we don't know what obviate means, we can, even if we don't know what obviate means, we can comfortably say that the need for traditional conservation, this need for traditional conservation can't be discussed. We are discussing a specific way of conservation. So bracelets versus old methods. That is what this option is saying. Bracelets versus old methods I can't say anything about. Will obviate is saying eliminate. So it's extreme and incorrect. But even if you didn't know the meaning of the word obviate, you can still eliminate option A based on the idea that traditional conservation या old methods के बारे में I can't say anything compared to bracelets. Right? Let's look at B. The bracelets and similar such devices significantly reduce the impact of poachers. This is just one example, right? Some company. So I can't say this significantly reduces impact. We aren't discussing it as a commonly accepted product. Let's look at D. The bracelets can accurately determine the exact cause of animals' abnormal movement and pattern. Accurately describe the exact cause. Invalid. Nowhere in the passage is suggested that we can accurately find out the exact cause. So let's look at C. The real-time information about an animal's whereabouts can help us better understand their movement patterns. We are told here that the company's algorithms use machine learning to spot when an animal is exhibiting abnormal movement patterns. So that means normal movement patterns, real-time information about an animal's whereabouts can help us better understand movement patterns. Normal movement patterns are known to us. This helps us understand the abnormal movement, right? So option C is valid and we'll check its validity. Real-time information about an animal's whereabouts can help us better understand their movement patterns. If I said cannot, right? Yeah, can never, it will eliminate the passage. The passage will be structurally affected. Some part of the passage will get negated if I negate this option. That tells me that C is definitely the right choice. Alright. So for this question, C is the correct choice. Remember, you can run this assumption test once you have narrowed down to what you think is the right choice. That way your accuracy for assumption questions will be much higher. Let's look at 16. What are the challenges of ensuring power grid stability? Right? How do we ensure power grid stability? This passage had multiple questions. When you have a long passage, of course, for the sake of discussion, I'll read the question stem first. When you have a long passage, there's no point reading these 4 question stems first because it's a waste of time. I can't remember them. I don't know what to look for in the passage. When it's a short passage, look at a question stem first. Alright. So we are looking for what are the challenge of ensuring power grid stability. We are told here ramping up renewable energy is a crucial step. Ensuring power grids. So if you ramp up renewable energy, there is a challenge, right? And the challenge is ensuring power grids remain stable because this was earlier tricky. We are told it was tricky earlier and it got more trickier now. मतलब ये challenge जो था वो challenge बढ़ गया यहाँ पे. This challenge increased, right? When we ramped up renewable energy, the stable energy power grid becomes a challenge. To maintain it becomes a challenge. We are told why the power supply can suddenly drop off, and to balance this, they need to have some reserves running in the background, right? If the power supply of a town completely drops off, that will lead to fluctuation. So to avoid fluctuation, they need reserves. The reserves are provided from fossil fuels, right? So the author is saying if you ramp up renewable energy, this stability of power grid becomes a challenge because this supply is suddenly lost and then you need reserves, you need fossil fuels to meet that gap. Then we are told AI is being used, and AI is being used how? To provide precise picture of how clouds develop. Okay, so if you know how clouds develop, this paragraph was specifically about how clouds will create a problem. If you know how clouds will develop, it will lead to better management of your power grid. All right. So let's go through the questions. Challenges of ensuring power grid stability. Let's look at A. Increased cost of energy generation required to meet the demand. Increased cost of energy generation nowhere discussed in the passage. D. Decreased efficiency of power grids. Not efficiency, not discussed in the passage. C. The need for fossil powered reserves will not be more than before. In fact, if we are using power grid, if we are using renewable energy sources, and there is a power failure, then we will need more fossil fuels, right? So will not be more is incorrect. In case of power grid failure, we'll need more fossil fuels, not less. B is the correct choice. Difficulty in balancing the grid. We are told here that it becomes trickier. Difficulty in balancing the grid with intermittent energy supply during blackouts, right? So the challenges of ensuring power grid stability are related to difficulty in balancing the grid with intermittent energy supply. So B is the correct choice for this question. Let's look at the next one. What is the role of generation reserves in maintaining power grid stability? तो इसमें role क्या था? To fill any gaps. If there is a blackout, to prevent blackout and there is a gap, what will you do? You will provide fossil fuel का reserve, right? Because renewable source में blackout हो गया, gap आ गया, so fossil fuel के साथ you will replace it. So this is what the author is talking about. So let's look at the options. A. They enable the quick ramping up of energy supply during power shortages. This is stated in the passage, but not with relation to how to prevent blackouts, right? So we are told after prevention of blackouts, read this, prevent blackouts, to fill any gaps, they need to have generation reserves. That can be quickly ramped up when there is a risk of power shortage. So we are discussing, this is mentioned in the passage, right? And if you notice here, they enable the quick ramping up of energy supply during power storages. So look at it this way. First major problem is that here they enable. This also would have been incorrect, right? They enable the quick ramping up because it's true, but it's not related to the role of generation reserves in maintaining power grid stability. It would happen after this. Enabling or disabling would happen after these reserves are used. And the second thing is that is most problematic about option A is during power storages is written. It should be shortages. Right, so storages is completely invalid. We aren't discussing shortages. So A is incorrect. For this word alone, this was a little difficult for students to spot. Enable तो काफी मुश्किल होगा spot करने के लिए, but this we should spot. We should read a statement carefully. Let's look at B. They provide a backdrop. They provide a backup source of renewable energy. So here again students have gone with B, but they provide a backup source of fossil fuels. Right, not of renewable energy. They provide a backup source of fossil fuels. So B is also incorrect. C, if you notice, they help reduce the reliance on fossil fuels by storing excess renewable energy. Again, by storing fossil fuels, they help reduce the reliance on fossil fuels is incorrect, and by storing renewable energy is also incorrect. C is incorrect. D is the correct choice. They help prevent blackouts by filling the gaps in power supply. So they help to prevent blackouts by filling gaps in power supply. Alright. So here D is the correct choice, D for Delhi. Let's look at the next one. We are looking at how does the use of AI technology help to reduce reliance on fossil-powered reserves. So use of AI technology, how does it help? We know it's the last paragraph, right? And it may be related to something stated here, but it's essentially from the last paragraph of the passage. let's go through the options. It allows for better prediction of weather patterns. So we are told precisely AI is used to provide a precise picture of how clouds develop, right? So I can't say it allows for better prediction of weather patterns such as, let's say, uh, thunderstorm, which is not just about clouds, it could be about other things also, right? So all weather patterns invalid, precisely related to clouds, precisely accurately related only to clouds. So obviously A is incorrect. D, it enables quick ramping up, is incorrect. It's not talking about clouds. And C, it helps optimize energy storage and distribution, is also incorrect, right? Helps optimize energy storage and distribution, nowhere discussed in the passage, as if you look at use of AI technology help reduce the reliance on fossil fuel. So this is only done by B. It provides a precise picture of how clouds develop. This is directly stated. So even though C, it helps optimize energy storage and distribution, like I said, it may talk about what is stated earlier, but the question is talking about how does the use of AI help specifically. So use of AI helps specifically to precisely predict how clouds develop. Only option B is the correct choice. So as a purely factual question, B is the only possible choice here. There is no other choice. Let's look at the next one. Which of the following is best supported by the passage above? Now, the Antyodaya principle means the rise of the last person in society. So basically, we would understand this as an inclusive concept, right? Inclusiveness badhane ka concept hai. It is a very interesting fact that almost all programs related to development have at their center this common man, right? Rise of the last person. They have at their center this common man. It is often that their path to reach this person, the last mile, is so long that the targeted beneficiary gets only partial benefits. तो इसमें author का एक criticism ये है कि Antyodaya is essentially we provide help to the last person, to the common man, but it is often seen that the last mile is so long कि उनको partial help ही मिलता है, ठीक है? So we intuitively understand it's about inclusiveness. It's a fairly easy passage to understand. Which of the following is best supported? Let's start with option D. The Antyodaya principle is not successful way of bringing development to the last person. We can't say anything in the passage is suggesting that it's not successful. Actually, it's nowhere actually are we discussing its overall success ratio. We are told that there are some difficulties, but overall success ratio is nil. ये नहीं बोल सकते. Now, let's look at B. The government programs for development of people are not beneficial to the last person in society. Obviously, these are incorrect. Now, students are confused between A and C. Let's read both. A में the Antyodaya principle focuses on upliftment of every person in society. So, every person was obviously problematic for students. And let's look at C. The long path to reach the targeted beneficiary results in the failure of Antyodaya principle. Now, we are told here that it is often seen. Is principle क्या है Antyodaya principle? That let's say help to the last common man, right? Last common man को help देना है. इसमें challenge है often. This challenge comes up often that the path is so long that beneficiary only gets partial benefits. So this is a common, often challenge. So the long path to reach the targeted beneficiary results in the failure of Antyodaya principle is incorrect unless and until I say the long path when the long path leads to only partial benefits, then this will lead to, or then this could lead to, then this may lead to failure of Antyodaya principle. In short, मैं क्या कह रहा हूं कि the path is long, ठीक है? This, let's say person A and person B both can be considered as last person or common man. अब A के लिए path long है and A gets only partial benefits. B के लिए path long है but B gets full benefits. Right? So for B, this option won't apply. Just a moment. So for B, let's look at person B जिसको full benefits मिल रहे हैं. For person B, the long path is not a failure of Antyodaya, right? So I can't say simply having a long path is failure of Antyodaya. ये गलत हो गया, right? Having a long path which leads to only partial delivery may be called failure. Remember that. So C is incorrect, D is incorrect. Let's look at B. Government programs are not beneficial. This is also incorrect, like I told you. A is the only possible choice. The Antyodaya principle focuses on upliftment of every person. Every person is acceptable because we are told last person, common man, this is talking about, including all Indians essentially, right? Including all Indians. So A is the correct choice for this question. All right. A is the correct choice for this Antyodaya question. Let's look at the next one. Which among the following is the author most likely to agree with? Now, this was a complicated passage for students to read. I'll explain what the passage is, but remember that you have to simplify sentences. When you reread a sentence, obviously in the exam you'll be rereading sentences. Make sure that you're consciously trying to simplify. Autopilot पे reread करोगे तो कुछ दिमाग में जाएगा नहीं. So let's simplify this first as, and by simplifying I'm saying मैंने बीच का सारा काट दिया suppose. To suppose that the I could have been formed by natural selection. ठीक है, so ये I कैसे form हुआ? To suppose that it's formed by natural selection seems absurd. मतलब seems highly absurd or highly impossible. Let's say the fact that the I is formed by natural selection is highly improbable. This we can understand. ठीक है, तो ऑथर पहले बोलता है कि आप अगर if you look at the details of the eye, you will be like this is not formed by natural selection. However, if any variation or modification in the organ be ever useful to an animal, मतलब अगर कोई भी modification animals के लिए useful बनता है, then the difficulty of believing that a complex eye could be formed by natural selection can hardly be considered real. तो पहले ऑथर ये कह रहा था, simply put, I is from evolution or natural selection is difficult to believe, right? The I which is evolution, which is formed by evolution or natural selection is difficult to believe. Then the author says, but it's believable. In the second half, the author says, but if you see changes, beneficial changes, if you see beneficial changes to an animal's eye, then you will believe that the eyes came from natural selection. So basically, did eyes develop from natural selection or not? And the author says that yes, it's very believable that eyes develop from natural selection, right? Okay, so let's look at the options the author most likely to agree with. A, the complexity of the eye has been created by design. So this complexity of the eye has been created by design. By design implies there is some designer, there is a person to design it, right? But we are told that this process occurs naturally, is created by natural processes. Natural process like evolution, right? Natural selection we are told here. So created by design, completely alien, beyond scope, invalid. Let's look at B. Natural selection can only lead to simple structures, not complex. पर author क्या बोल रहा है? पहले complex author को लगा कि नहीं आएगा natural selection से. Then the author says if you actually look at it, it's very easy to believe that natural selection made the eye. So can only lead to simple structures is opposite of the author's opinion. Now let's look at option C. Variation or modification in the organ is always useful. This is not stated. We are told if any modification ever be useful. So this means if useful हो सकता है या नहीं हो सकता है, two possibilities. So I can't say always useful, right? So A, B and C are invalid. D is the correct choice. The doubt. तो पहले ये क्या था? Doubt. To suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection is absurd. is highly improbable. Improbable का synonym क्या है? Doubtful. Is highly doubtful. So the doubt, ये जो doubt है, whether the eye could have been formed by natural selection. ये doubt था अपने को कि whether the eye is formed by natural selection. Did natural selection form the eye? ये doubt था. This doubt is largely misplaced. मतलब ये doubt गलत है. Can hardly be considered real. Is the same as saying is largely misplaced. This doubt is an invalid doubt, right? The author is trying to say that this doubt, that did the eye come from, let's look at this. Did the eye come from natural selection? ये doubt है. This doubt is an invalid doubt according to the author, but invalid in degrees. Invalid को author कह रहा है can hardly be considered real. So it's in degrees, so the examiner has put is largely misplaced, right? It's not completely saying this doubt is invalid, it's largely misplaced. For that reason, D is the clear choice for this question. Let's look at the next one. Which of the following is the most rational logical assumption? We know how to treat assumption questions by now, I'm sure. Decentralization, we are discussing, generally results in more transparency between government and the people, and this leads to better grievance redressal. We are told civil servants, we are given an example, civil servants can suggest interventions because redressal is better, flow of information is better, etc. However, many initial concerns and concerns are told to us. About decentralization, the author has many initial concerns, right? These concerns such as financial issues, real devolution, genuine representation, these continue to exist. These concerns still continue to exist, right? And too often, these issues are dependent on the political parties' reluctance to cede power. तो ये जो issues है, ये सारे issues, let's say issue A, B and C. एक तो first let me clarify for all of you all how I know that many initial concerns is talking about decentralization. Author ने पहले क्या कहा? Decentralization is beneficial. Let's say decentralization is beneficial is first sentence. Second sentence is saying civil servants can also help. So second sentence also we'll take to mean decentralization is beneficial. So sentence 1 says decentralization is positive. Sentence 2 also says decentralization 1 and 2. Sentence 2 also says decentralization is positive. Sentence 3 says, however, many concerns exist. So sentence 3 is saying, is decentralization going to work? So I know this sentence, however many initial concerns, these concerns is referring to decentralization. Okay. So now that I've explained that, we are looking for a valid assumption and we are told that these issues are existing because of political parties unwilling to cede their power, unwilling to give up their power. Let's look at A. All initial concerns have been resolved. Firstly, not even few are resolved, they continue to exist. So have been resolved is completely, even if many लिखते तो भी गलत होता था, right? So all तो obviously incorrect. Let's look at B. Civil servants are always able to suggest effective interventions. हमेशा they'll suggest effective interventions. Invalid, not stated. D. Any grievance redressal mechanism is always beneficial. Again, extreme, not discussed in the passage. C is the only possible choice. The challenges to decentralization mostly stem from political parties' unwillingness to give up power. Unwillingness is the same as reluctance. It's synonymous with reluctance. Reluctance to cede power is the same as unwillingness to cede power. C is the correct choice for this question. Some of you took unwillingness to be extreme. It's not, it's actually the same thing. Alright. C is the correct choice for this question. Let's look at the next one. From the passage, we can best conclude that. So, sort of inferential implication based. Let's look at, it is often argued that expanding nuclear power production protects the climate. So this is the main point of the author, and I'm sure all of you all went through the passage. Fairly easy passage. We are told nuclear power is good, and we are given example of Japan, जिसमें even after the earthquake they're still pursuing nuclear power. So they feel nuclear power is beneficial, and that's what is discussed. So which conclusion would be valid? Let's look at A, the 2001 earthquake in Japan has proved nuclear power as an unreliable energy source. Has proved is invalid. In fact, the author is calling it a possibly reliable source. So unreliable to galat hai. D, there is a global consensus on the use of nuclear power. Global consensus incorrect because the author is saying it is often argued. If you need to argue it, that means no consensus. Right? So global consensus incorrect. C, increasing the efficiency of nuclear power is the only way to protect the planet. Only way to protect the planet, incorrect. Let's look at B. Expansion of nuclear power production can be beneficial for the globe. This is essentially what this statement was trying to say. Option B is a repetition of that statement. B is the clear choice for this question. Alright, let's look at the next question. Again, one of those questions where maybe we can use the options beneficially, maybe we can solve it quicker. Let's go through the passage once. We are looking for rational implications for India specifically. We are told flash droughts. What are flash droughts? It's defined. They come quickly, can lay waste to crops. They are becoming more common. Frequency बढ़ रही है and faster to develop. So quick rate of development बढ़ रहा है, frequency बढ़ रही है, and this is caused by human climate change. These things, which is flash droughts or these laying waste to crops, these things have grave consequences for humans. This is obvious. Then we are told the study found that flash droughts occurred more often in certain countries and places such as India. ठीक है. Now passage is fairly easy. What I told you to do in this question, please remember this, that most rational and practical implications for what? If for something is given, pay attention to that. Sometimes it's not mentioned because it's not relevant, but when it is mentioned, pay attention to for what. So implications for India, right? And we are told यहाँ पे India is mentioned. Clear? Okay, let's look at one. Flash droughts are becoming more common and faster. They're becoming more common and faster to develop in India due to human-caused climate change. This is happening due to human-caused climate change. And if you notice, the study found, what did the study find? That these occurred more often in India. So we know for sure that flash droughts are becoming more common. Flash droughts are becoming more common in India, for sure. This is directly stated. And we are told this problem is essentially, this problem would have grave consequences. So flash droughts are becoming more common, faster to develop. Both of these tendencies will happen in India. This is a valid implication. Let's look at 2. More frequent and abrupt dry spells in India could have grave consequences. We are told ये जो problem है flash droughts, this will have grave consequences. Grave consequences specifically for certain countries like India. So more frequent dry spells in India, countries like India, so India, could have grave consequences. Obviously true. Right? 1 is true, 2 is true. So 1 is true bole to A and C are gone. Right? So now I just need to check between 4. I just need to check option 3 whether it's valid or not. 4 to hai. Let's look at 3. In India, flash droughts occur more often than slower ones as compared to Amazon basin. So India mein flash droughts occur more often. This is valid. But if you say as compared to Amazon basin, invalid. The author has not made a comparison between those places which are mentioned. Right? So it could be similar, it could be less, we don't know. So 3 is incorrect. So 3 is incorrect, we go with option B. I'll also discuss 4. Man-made climate change is a major reason. We are told man-made climate change is a major reason for the increasing frequency and speed of flash droughts. So this would be a implication for India as well, right? Man-made climate change is a major reason for increasing frequency and speed of flash droughts in India too. So B is the correct choice for this question. All right. B for boy. Let's look at, just remember this, rational practical implications for India. What you have to look for here, even by elimination, we know some of you may have had problems with this part, which is faster to, but overall if you see, the options don't allow us for any other choice. There is no way we can accept 3 because there is no comparison made. So since we can accept 3, all of these are gone, right? Okay. Let's look at, so B is the right choice for this question. Let's look at the next one. Which of the following is the most logical rational inference? RBI is charged with targeting certain level of inflation. We know this. It primarily targets this by raising interest rate. This also we know. Now higher interest rates drag down economic growth because loans of kinds become costlier. And this is the key point, RBI hits overall demand to bridge the gap. So how does RBI target inflation? RBI hits overall demand. Now, which of the following is the most rational inference? Like I said, we have to put two statements together or maybe three statements, four statements and come up with an evidence-based inference. Okay, that is not directly stated in the passage. So let's look at A. The RBI uses other tools very infrequently. Now, firstly, there's no discussion of other tools ka frequency. Right? We are told RBI is charged with, and it primarily does this by raising interest rates. So, iske baad, let's say this is raising interest rates. So, we'll say interest rates are raised. This is one way. If there are any other multiple ways to target inflation, we don't know. Right? And if they are used frequently or infrequently, we don't know. So, this comparison is invalid. Let's look at B. Higher interest rates in the economy don't have much impact on economic growth. Don't have much impact, incorrect. We are told it affects economic growth here. Right? So, B is invalid. No one would have gone with B. Let's look at C. The RBI only focuses on controlling inflation. So, only focuses on controlling inflation is invalid. D is the correct choice. For the RBI, controlling demand is to control inflation. Right? For the RBI, if you control, let's say for the RBI, if you control demand, if control demand, right, hits overall demand. So, if you control demand, what you can do is you can target a certain level of inflation. So, you can bring down inflation. So, for RBI, controlling demand is to control inflation or will lead to control inflation. So, all we can say is for RBI, controlling demand is the same as controlling inflation. Obviously, this is not stated in the option, the same as. I'm just using these words to simplify. That's not exactly what the option means. The option is trying to say for RBI, if they control demand, they can control inflation. D is the clear choice. No other choice is a valid inference. If I said for RBI, controlling demand is nowhere linked to control inflation, then we can say that it will create some problems with one of the facts, right? So, okay, let's look at the next one. The author of the passage would be most likely to agree with which of the following? So, this is our last question here. Those who insist on literacy as a test and insist upon making it a condition precedent to enfranchisement, so precedent to voting or the right of voting, right, commit two mistakes. So the author is saying ki if you put education as a criteria, literacy as a criteria for voting, you commit two mistakes. First mistake is you assume illiterate person is necessarily an unintelligent person. तो author ये बोल रहा है ये गलत सोच है. The second mistake is literacy necessarily imports higher level of intelligence. Literacy से आप you will become more intelligent. This is also invalid according to the author. Both of these are invalid and they are committed. These mistakes are committed by those people who insist on literacy as a test. Okay. Now let's look at A. Illiterate people are just as intelligent as literate people. This is actually opposite of the passage. The author is not trying to say anything about whether literacy and intelligence, whether they have any connection. So A is incorrect. B. Literacy should never be considered as a requirement for voting or any other important rights. Now, any other important rights not discussed. Literacy should never be considered extreme and invalid. Right? Let's look at D. Literate people are usually more knowledgeable or intelligent. So this is completely opposite. This is invalid. And let's look at C. Insisting on literacy as a requirement for voting is unfair and ineffective. So insisting, let's look at insisting on literacy. Here, those who insist on literacy, no problems, directly stated as a requirement for voting. So as a precedent to enfranchisement, directly stated, is unfair and ineffective. तो unfair क्यों है? Because it's wrong, it's a mistake to consider someone illiterate and not to give them any voting rights. So is unfair. This is valid. Why is it ineffective? The second problem is they suppose that literacy will lead to intelligence. So effectiveness comes from, suppose only educated people, we'll put a condition, only 10th above education people can vote. So ये rule, if we make this rule, the objective of this rule would be that more literate and therefore more intelligent people will vote, right? पर ऑथर कह रहा है दिस इज नॉनसेंस, ऐसा कुछ है ही नहीं कि मोर लिटरेट देयरफॉर मोर इंटेलिजेंट, ये इनवैलिड सोच है. सो इट्स इनइफेक्टिव. योर ऑब्जेक्टिव वाज टू इंप्रूव द वोटिंग प्रोसेस, इट्स नॉट बीइंग इंप्रूव्ड. वहां से ये इनइफेक्टिव वर्ड आ रहा है. सो अनफेयर एंड इनइफेक्टिव आर वैलिड. सी इज द करेक्ट चॉइस फॉर दिस क्वेश्चन. ऑलराइट, सो दीज आर ऑल द क्वेश्चंस दैट वर in the test. Let's quickly go through what we are supposed to do in the exam. Make sure that your small passages, you read the question stem first. Long passages, you just go through them and solve all the questions which follow. The main thing that is going to affect all of your accuracies is whether before you start with the question, you have, to your level of satisfaction, clarity about the passage. Ask yourself this question before you move on to the options. And the other factor that will help with accuracy is always eliminate your way to answer and be very precise as to why you are eliminating each option. Some certain words or phrases that you can't find in the passage. Follow these two processes and your accuracy will be high. So, all right, that's all from me. Thank you, everyone. All the best.